Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal this hot Monday. Boy, heat wave in Southern California. And I took a couple days off last week and traveled a bit. I had to go up to Northern California on some, well, let's call it business. But anyway, I had to go up there, and so I thought I'd get near those fires that are going on, and I did. And it was amazing. I talked to several firefighters, and they said it's the most incredible thing they've ever seen in their life. I asked them about that fire tornado, and they said they had talked to a few of their friends and said it was probably something out of an apocalyptic movie. Never seeing anything like it. And what I'm talking about, a lot of times in forest fires, there'll be a swirl or a whirl created by the heat, but this one was at an amazing speed. They clocked it at over 145 miles an hour and just ripped apart trees, uprooted trees and buildings, etc. And the fire right now, I've been keeping track of it. I'm back now down south and keeping track of it. And I asked one of the firefighters if he would text me and let me know. He's too busy to do any kind of interviews, and he said sure, and he'll keep me abreast. And they're moving to the front lines. And I asked him, he said there's even been firefighters brought over from Australia and New Zealand to help in this massive fire that he said as of yesterday was 35%. No, it grew by 25%. And I believe it's 30% contained, they say. But it grew by 25% overnight, and enormous amount of damage. Lives have been lost. I can't imagine the livestock that no one speaks about, how many animals have been affected by this. And we're sitting here at the beginning of the California wildfire season. This is just the beginning. And I'll tell you what, folks, if you're lucky enough to live near the coast, I guess that's amazing, because I've been talking to people all over the country, at least in California and Phoenix. The temperatures are just skyrocketing. I mean, I was 120 something in Phoenix. Temperatures all over are in the hundreds, days on days on days. And I even talked to some of my friends down in Mexico, and Mexicali was at 126 degrees. It was amazing. Now, if you go to the coast, of course, you're going to be in the 70s or 80s with a little bit of humidity. And I guess that's your only hope. I mean, I can't imagine living without air conditioning in some of these places. So anyway, let's keep an eye on those fires. And the first question that always comes up on a show like mine is whether these are a false flag. I mean, whether they're staged, whether they're weather manipulated. And you can go and search out those websites that talk about it, and a lot of them make some sense. But it's one of those kind of things that can never really be proven, and you can pull your hair out. You understand that you've been lied to by your government, by many things. Now, we know that 9/11 was a contrived event, and your government was instrumental in bringing down the Twin Towers in 2001. And so my thinking is, if they could do this, then why do you believe anything anymore that comes out of Washington, D.C.? And at the present rate, I believe that the next thing that we should worry about, and when I say worry about, I say, well, what could they do next to us? Another false flag. that could really be devastating. And I come to a lot of crazy conclusions because I know that we've been lied to. And I mean, we've been lied to even about what we, where we live, how the earth and the universe is, well, let's call it our proximity to the sun and the moon and all this stuff we've been lied to. And if the elite were truthful, we would be very, this whole world would be in a lot better shape, and we know that. But that's not their goal. It's chaos, and you can see how they do it by looking to create a problem, then create the solution, and then bring the world into the position they want it. And we've talked about that many times. So I was thinking today, what is really sticking out there that could really be devastating? Can you imagine not having any power during crisis, especially in the summertime? Or let's imagine you're in Fargo, North Dakota in the winter, and all the power grid is out. And when I say the power grid, what is an amazing story here is that we're considered to be the richest country in the world, right? And we have all this money being spent overseas on crazy wars, trillions of dollars being spent on war. And even just look at what Obama did when he sent over all that money to Iran, supposedly our enemy, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, kind of like a drug-dealing president, paying off the Ayatollah in Iran. That's just a small portion of money, but when you think about it, what has been neglected here in the country? We talk about a lot of things. One, we can look at the deterioration of our inner cities, which is a key thing going on. I mean, I don't know how people anymore, unless you got a lot of money, want to live in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago, even Chicago or any of these places, San Francisco or San Diego. I mean, look at the prices. And then look at what's going on. And I want to talk about this and then get to, again, the power grid, which is an amazing story. But when we look at what's going on in our inner cities, the homeless situation in San Francisco is being allowed to play out. That could be stopped immediately, but our government officials are allowing this to happen. People in San Francisco say they walk down the streets, and I've read reports about it, and there's human feces all over the place. People have been canceling business meetings and conventions there because the city has deteriorated. I mean, got homeless people living there. And I am nothing against homeless people, but it doesn't have to be that way. And this drug culture that they've created and profited from is devastating. And this is one way to bring America to its knees. Now, there was a British journalist that did a story, and they're mainstream, so they're not going to get to the deep root cause of these things. But let's look at how it's playing out. I remember years ago when I went to school in Los Angeles. I mean, I worked in the court system, having to travel to numerous courts daily. So I was in downtown LA, then in Santa Monica. So I know that city like the back of my hand. I was all over the place, from Santa Ana down to Pomona, and then you go I know every freeway like the back of my hand. Imagine if I couldn't imagine doing that today. But being in the court system and working in workers' compensation law, I had to make many court appearances, and some of them led me into, dealing with clients, led me into some of the real bad neighborhoods in LA. But still, I never felt. I knew there was a serious, you always have a poverty problem in our country that could be corrected. But I haven't been back there in years. But apparently this British journalist went to LA into that's called the Skid Row district. And it's just an amazing story she presented about how this place in America could exist. Probably worse than any third world country, she said. And she documented all of this stuff. And I'm sitting there going, if you don't understand the root cause of why they're doing this, you're going to pull your hair out, because you're going to then blame people. Just blame them for, getting into drugs, not being responsible, stuff like that. And of course, every person has to take account of his life. But people can be easily manipulated when the elite can manipulate the economy and play this rich-poor game in a country like this. It doesn't have to be that way. And all the real support and help is window dressing. So you really have to get behind the scenes and figure out where this is coming from. And that's where my show comes into play, because we talk a lot about who's in the top echelon of this system that's really controlling our politicians, really controlling how the banking systems are operating, how they're moving the world into a globalist situation through, unfettered and just uncontrolled immigration all over Europe and the Western civilization, America included. And how, if you live in America and watch the news, you're going to get really different pictures depending on whether you're a Trump supporter or not. And those who are Trump supporter would think, boy, America's coming back, it's back to itself. And then if you're on the other side listening to CNN, you're going to hear a whole completely different story. And really the whole game is the left-right Hegelian dialectic. And the goal of even the Trump administration, even though many at the top levels will understand, but many in that lower level group in Washington have no idea. But really, Trump's goal is to bring the world into a globalist situation, even though he talks a nationalist game. And you only have to see how this is playing out, this chaos that's being created. And in the end, you can bet that the Vatican and the Jesuits, who control a lot of this, why not? They have the most money in the world. They're controlling a movement to globalize the world. So it's easier to basically be controlled. And so America has to be a target. It was a target back in 1776 when the revolution ended and we formed our Constitution. America was always in the crosshairs of the Vatican and the elites in Europe, and they had to gain control of this country. And the only way they could do it is by creating this illusion of freedom, this illusion that freedom of religion and all this exists, with the pretense that it does, but in the end, if they can get their foot in the door, they can take control and you'll have no freedoms. And you can see that right now, because everything you see is this kind of idea that you are being manipulated. You can see it in front, you can see your freedoms being taken away. You can see the justice system deteriorating before your very eyes, and they're doing that right in Washington, D.C. If you watch what they're doing, they're bringing down the justice system, and people are sitting there going, we can't get any justice in this. This country there's no justice anymore. And so the whole idea is to bring America to its knees, and they have to do it by divide and conquer. Now, the last 10 minutes here, I want to present to you it's a 10-minute presentation, I believe. It might go into the second half hour. American Blackout, Are You Prepared? And with all the money that we do have, why have we allowed our power grid to be worse than a lot of the, well, of course, many of the countries in the world are far more advanced. Our power grid is so at a position where it can be taken down. We've allowed it, the power people, the power elite have allowed it to deteriorate without putting money into upgrading the system for a reason. And that may be that they want to create a blackout, which would devastate this country. And if they did things in the right ways, you're going to listen here. The whole country could be easily without power for 18 months before it could be restored, and it's not a difficult thing to do. Now, I'm by no means an expert in this. That's why I want to call upon this presentation, and let's listen, because I'm not prepared for a blackout, and I'm sure you're not either. Here we go on the Investigative Journal.
Delivery electricity in the United States. They are the Western, Eastern, and Texas grids. Together, they are comprised of more than 160,000 miles of transmission lines and 55,000 electric substations. Perhaps one of the worst parts about it, though, is that you really only need to take out one of the grids to cause a national connection.
Where the power is actually created at the power plant, there's a transformer that increases the voltage so it can actually travel a long distance. And then there's a transformer that steps down that voltage so it can actually be sent to your house.
An extra high voltage transformer, or what's called a VHV transformer, is the foundation stone of our modern civilization. These VHV transformers are our civilization, what aqueducts and roads were to the world. Our society can't operate without it. But experts tell for the record that VHV transformers are the most unprotected critical infrastructure assets in the nation. They are one of the most technologically difficult things to manufacture in the modern world. Every VHV transformer plays a unique role in the grid. It's custom made for the grid. The windings actually have to be done by hand. They're hand built. And while we exported the technology for the electric grid to the world, like so many things, like the airplane, like the automobile, we used to build them. We exported these things to the world. But now we have to import them from overseas. There's only 2 countries in the world that build them for export purposes, South Korea and Germany. And it takes 18 months, a year and a half, just to build one. And so that's why, someone armed with a sniper rifle, hacking the transformers in San Jose, that if they were to use simple technologies to destroy these transformers, it could strike at the heart of our civilization. In response to security risks exposed by the San Jose attack, FERC conducted a classified study in 2013. According to the Wall Street Journal, that study revealed alarming results. They didn't want the report publicized because our vulnerability is so great. So they concluded that the attack on just 9 out of 55,000 substations, that you knew which 9 substations to attack. And then you could basically plunge the whole United States into a blackout that would last 18 months.
Concern over whether the U.S. is actually prepared to respond if our power grid is compromised. The cybersecurity expert Morgan Rice. Morgan, ironically, I think where I read is that one of the good things we have going for us is our grid is so old, it might be, it might not be smart enough to be compromised.
Yeah, look, all you have to do, Charles, is watch a natural disaster, and you'll see that our power grid is still fragile. We're doing a lot better at protecting it, but that's the problem. It's kind of the analogy of saying, well, I can go 2 rounds with Mike Tyson back in the day. Yeah, well, you still can't go 15. We've got to be able to go that full 15 rounds and survive a direct attack. Look, Russia's been using Ukraine as their punching bag for a lot of years, so our lessons we need to learn are from watching what they're doing in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, I remember it wasn't long ago when we had a major power outage in the Northeast that was caused by a small incident in Canada. So it stands to reason we're extraordinarily vulnerable, and we've been vulnerable for a long time. Why don't we fix this?
Well, if you look at the patchwork that is called the energy grid, I mean, it is a collection of a lot of different things, a lot of different power stations, a lot of different technologies. They're transitioning, trying to make things more network-oriented, trying to beef up their cybersecurity, but that brings its own problems because now we're trying to connect older systems to network technology, and that's one of the flaws that they took advantage of in the Ukraine attack. They attacked these cables that connected the power systems to the computer networks and physically damaged them. So yeah, there's a lot of work we still have to do on this, Charles, but the biggest thing you're talking about is that recovery piece. We know we're going to get attacked. The question is, how fast can we reconstitute and recover our energy? Because you want to go after a nation, as was Negro was saying that other thing, it's a maximum war. Go after their power, go after their water, and you will bring a nation to its knees.
Well, wouldn't it be smarter, though, to be able to beef up our defenses rather than have to figure out a way to reboot this age system here that we have, this patchwork we've already got?
That could be part of the infrastructure spending. We keep thinking of bridges and tunnels. They're going to be there what really affects us are things like our IT information systems, the OPM breach you and I have talked about before. All of these aging infrastructures, including the energy one, we've got to spend an equivalent amount of money to beef up our infrastructure, because you know why? We've got autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles coming. And if we can't protect the energy grid, how are we going to protect unmanned vehicles bouncing around the 101 like a bunch of pinballs?
Yeah, I mean, it's a glaring issue. It's an issue everyone knows about. What's the problem here? Is it money? And I'm sure it is. And ultimately, where does it come from? Whose responsibility is it? Is it a local responsibility? Is it a federal responsibility? And what role does private business have with respect to putting in money into the solution?
I think Milton Friedman said it best. He said there's no such thing as a free lunch. At the end of the day, I guess he's probably going to pay us, the consumers, in our electric bills. But 85% of the critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. But it still needs government leadership. Certain things around mandates. You don't want unfunded mandates, so there has to be some partnership. And I'll tell you what's probably the best thing the government can do right now. They're trying to do it through these things called ISACs, Information Sharing Analysis Centers. But it's sharing that intelligence, that forewarning, doing a better job of preparing us for these types of attacks. But look, it will not be solved overnight, but it will take some regulation. Right. It'll take some money. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, probably who's going to pay for it, or you and me, when we see our electric bills, that's the cost of defense. That's what goes into keeping the lights on.
Although I tell you, I'd rather pay for that than a bunch of windmills. Let me just real quickly ask you this. Russia has the capability, I'm sure, or getting there, so does China. Do any rogue actors have that ability now, if they wanted to turn off lights around this country?
Yeah, Charles, I was in a documentary called True Iran, and we talked about the cyber threat of Iran. They were actually in a dam up in New York, and they would have been able to successfully take over that dam except for a routine maintenance, which disconnected the network. So we already know that Iran is acting in our critical infrastructure as well. North Korea, we'll see if this détente overture is going to make an effect on them, but they're the players I worry about. Those four are the quartet that I worry about, the four horsemen.
As you can see, we're dark. It's not just a belated time for Halloween. It's a taste of what one noted journalist says could happen if a hacker manages to sabotage American power grids. Our cover story is reported by Jim.
When the lights go out, we usually know why.
Hurricane Sandy coming ashore on the East Coast.
Mother Nature is at it again. Most of the time, we manage to get through it. But what if the power went out in a number of states, affecting millions of people for weeks, even months?
As you were researching this, did you personally find yourself getting frightened?
I think frightened is a little bit too strong, but maybe I should have been. Yes, it is frightening. It is frightening enough that my wife and I decided we were going to buy enough freeze-dried food for all of our kids and their kids.
In his book, Lights Out, veteran journalist Ted Koppel paints a grim picture of a paralyzing power outage in the form of an all-out cyber attack on the nation's electrical grid.
Who are the potential perpetrators here? Who do we have to fear the most? Is it Russia, China, Iran, terrorists?
Okay, so there you go. You got Ted Koppel. Now, Ted Koppel, hopefully we turn the volume up on that. I couldn't get any more volume on that presentation, so I apologize. Maybe the studio can made that better, but hopefully they did. But it was worth listening to, because here you have Ted Koppel, who's a mainstream journalist, writing a book about it. And they usually like to tell you what they're going to do in advance. And I'm saying to you people, it would be devastating. And do some research on it and perhaps start preparing for that event to come. Because there hasn't been a big, huge 9/11 since 9/11, right? Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet. or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, talking about could there be a blackout in America? Ted Koppel, a former mainstream journalist, wrote a book about it. And like I said, the power elite usually tell you, Vatican-led New World Order usually tell you what they're going to do in advance. So are you prepared for it? Well, hell no. Who could be prepared in a world where you need lights, especially in inner cities? Could you imagine 18 months without it? And did you hear that if the enemy, so to speak, knows what substations to hit, if they hit 9 substations in America, they could put the lights out in the whole country? Amazing. Well, anyway, that's why they haven't fixed it, because they want to maybe create another false flag, because they will blame some foreign enemy, some terrorist group, just like they did in 9/11. And so I found for you something that you might be interested in. It's called the Coming 3 False Flag Events. Now, if you read the internet, everything's a false flag, and I don't agree with that. I believe they select certain places and certain things. The school shootings are a good example. I think the Las Vegas shooting's another example. Also, what was that gay bar hit in Florida? Where a number of people were killed. So, yeah, there are a lot of false flags, and you could drive yourself crazy trying to figure out which one is or isn't. But I think I concentrate on the big ones, and 9/11 is a great example. And I always say this: if you research it well enough, you'll come to the conclusion that was an inside job. And at that particular juncture, you can't believe anything that the power elite, the Vatican-led New World Order, or your high-level politicians tell you. And that is a fact. Because if they can pull that off, as well as pull off the murders of people like Kennedy or Lincoln, they can do about anything they want. And so start doing your homework. And they're not through with us yet here in America, are they? Let's get to this. This will take us almost to the end of the show. And it's called the Coming 3 False Flag Events. I like to do this sometimes because I listen to so much, get so many emails on things, that occasionally I like to play something new. And then if there's something really crazy in there, you can blame me. So here we go. 3 coming false flag attacks. Here we go.
False flag operations are covert operations designed to deceive the public in order to make an attack look like some outside force carried it out. This gives a nation the ability to start a war and make it look like they were the victims. This is very important if the public does not want war, and it also limits the ability for opposing interests to stop the new war. Any opposition, foreign or domestic, would immediately be put in the same category as those that they claim did the false flag.
You're either with us or you're with the enemy.
False flags do not happen very often, but when they do, they change the paradigm we operate in. We all see how the world has been changed forever after 9/11. Before 9/11, we would not have put up with such a loss of privacy and a loss of liberty, much less a decade of war looking for weapons of mass destruction or men in caves.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
With the supposed death of Osama bin Laden and the supposed end of military actions in Iraq, I feel the decks are cleared for the next big event. Historically, false flags are military in nature, but I feel going forward they will morph into something much worse. Every system built on debt needs constant debt to be created, or the system implodes. If the criminal elite can expand the debt system through asset bubbles, then all is well. But what happens if they can't get more debt created? They need to either steal other assets to provide capital for the system, or they need a reason to create massive debts that the masses will sacrifice for. Wars do both. With war, the criminal elite can confiscate the natural resources of other nations and provide the context to create massive amount of new debt. Our paradigm is failing, and there is no fixing it. There is so much inequity built into the system at every level. The only answer is for a complete collapse. This collapse will leave a generational scar so large that humanity might never consider again fractional reserve banking or the war machine it enables. Until that collapse, the criminal elite will do what they've always done: create more debt and more wars. The criminal elite see their power paradigm collapsing on its own cancerous self. A silver default, debt ceiling doom, dollar collapse, peak oil, or whatever leads ultimately to the end of the Anglo-American petrodollar financial paradigm. The Anglo-American elite might need to pull off 3 false flags in order to fail forward. This might include the typical military false flag, an economic false flag, and an informational false flag. These dramatic measures will seem necessary to the criminal elite, and the horrific toll on humanity will be justified in their minds. This societal upheaval will be time for the criminal elite to settle all the threats to their power paradigm, much like the end of Godfather 1. The first of the 3 threats to their power is the death of the dollar. The dollar is the basis of all the criminal elite's power. Without it, or an equivalent of it, they have no means to create debt that enslaves nations, states, corporations, and citizens of the world. This debt money provides the criminal elite an unlimited checkbook to fund the world's most powerful military that controls the world's natural resources, so that their corporations
corporations can harvest them. It also protects the shipping lanes that transports the rest of the world's trade. This debt money also buys political power for which the elite rig the game in their favor. And finally, the criminal elite used their money to own all the major media in order to distract the masses from the real problem in the world, the debt-based banking system, and the paradigm it finances. It is no secret that the dollar is going to die. It is a mathematical inevitability. Nothing can stop the ultimate collapse of the dollar. Our monetary system is based on debt, and in order for it to work, more debt needs to be created every year in excess of the debt and interest accrued the year before. If it does not happen, there will be a massive wave of defaults that would suck the system dry in a few weeks. The elite don't necessarily care if the dollar lives or dies. They just want to control the world's currency. They would ultimately like to have a global international currency that would be far away from pesky national politicians. So if the dollar is doomed, how can the criminal elite fail forward? They can create a financial crisis so incredible that desperate people would beg the elite to make the pain stop. They did this in 1907 to set the stage for the Federal Reserve. They did this in 2008 when they held up America for $700 billion. They will do it again and use the line of stability as the main reason why we should accept their new corrupt plan. I don't think that they could pull off something this large without a much larger distraction to silence the masses. The only thing big enough to scare the masses under the protective hug of the elite is another world war. This war can put an end to another threat of the current world order, the anti-hegemon. Non-Anglo-American nations like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, among others, have been gaining an incredible amount of power. I call these group of non-Anglo-American powers the anti-hegemon, as they have no uniting ideology, race, or religion, other than standing in opposition to the hegemonic power of the Anglo-American Empire. The anti-hegemon nations have so much to gain from a retreat of the Anglo-American Empire from the world stage. Countries like China, Russia, Iran, Venezuela, India, and many more, to a lesser extent like Japan, Korea, Germany, and France, have been on the losing end of the Anglo-American Empire for over a century. These nations have a history of Anglo-American losses like the Cold War, Opium Wars, Operation Ajax, the CIA attempted coup of Chavez, British colonization of India, apartheid, Hiroshima, the closing of the gold window by Nixon, and Waterloo. These are only some of the examples the Anglo-American elite have used in the past to ensure their supremacy. The Anglo-American elite have used every form of deceit to change or cheat the rules in pursuit of world domination. I believe the most likely event for a military false flag will be an American ship sunk in the Strait of Hormuz, supposedly by the Iranians. In order to understand this, it is imperative to understand the petrodollar. After Nixon took the dollar off the international gold standard, the Anglo-American elite devised a way to back the dollar with oil. Without going into too much detail, the plan was simply for their Arab partners to raise the price of oil dramatically and only sell their oil for dollars. They would then recycle all of those dollars back into the Anglo-American financial centers. So if you ever wondered why the Arab nations that called us the Great Satan gave us all their dollars, you now know why. The defense of this petrodollar standard has led us to invade Iraq when Saddam Hussein sold oil for euros, and Gaddafi in Libya when he proposed that he and other nations sell their oil for the new gold dinar. This is also why so many sanctions have been put onto Iran. The Iranians opened up their oil bores in 2008 to sell their oil for anything but the dollar. An attack on an American warship would be exactly what Dick Cheney plotted to do in 2008 before he left office. Here is an insider's account of that meeting from the famed journalist Seymour Hersh.
That a few weeks later, a meeting took place in the vice president's office. Quote, the subject was how to create a casus belli between Tehran and Washington. What you're writing there is that Cheney, there was a meeting in the White House where Cheney presided over, looking to cook up the next war. A false war, based on false intelligence.
Among the items considered and rejected, which is why the New Yorker did not publish it on grounds that it wasn't accepted. One of the items was, why not, there was a dozen ideas probably out of how to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard build 4 or 5 irate boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them, with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes to the Straits of Hormuz, start a shootout. Might cost some lives. And it was rejected because you can't have Americans killing America. But that's the level of stuff we were talking about, provocation.
I don't even think that it would necessarily be an American that pulls off this attack on the American ship. If you look at who's been pushing for war with Iran the most, it is Israel. And the neocons that got us into the last war, they proudly talk about how they get us to fight their wars. Here's a clip of Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu talking about their secret weapon.
But I'll tell you one thing, unlike America, Israel seems to be able to fight wars very quickly. What is your secret? Because we don't seem to have the hang of that.
The secret is that we have America. And America, see, the point is that Israel...
If you think that that was just a slip, please look into Project for a New American Century or the 1967 USS Liberty incident, where unmarked Israeli planes attacked and nearly sunk the most decorated ship in our fleet with the purpose of getting the United States to attack Egypt.
I frankly think that crisis initiation is really tough. And it's very hard for me to see how the United States president can get us to war with Iran. Which leads me to conclude that if, in fact, compromise is not coming, that the traditional way of America gets to war is what would be best for U.S. interests. Some people might think that Mr. Roosevelt wanted to get us into World War II, as David mentioned. You may recall we had to wait for Pearl Harbor. Some people might think Mr. Wilson wanted to get us into World War I. You may recall he had to wait for the Lusitania episode. Some people might think that Mr. Johnson wanted to send troops to Vietnam. You may recall that he had to wait for the Gulf of Tonkin episode. We didn't go to war with Spain until the until the Maine exploded.
Delightful in Cuba, stop. Could send you prose poems about scenery, but don't feel right spending your money. Stop. There is no war in Cuba. Signed, Wheeler. Any answer?
Yes, dear Wheeler, you provide the prose poems. I'll provide the war.
That's fine, Mr. Taylor.
And may I point out that Mr. Lincoln did not feel he could call out the Federal Army until Fort Sumter was attacked, which is why he ordered the commander at Fort Sumter to do exactly that thing which the South Carolinians had said would cause an attack. So if, in fact, the Iranians aren't going to compromise, it would be best if somebody else started the war. One can combine other means of pressure with sanctions. I mentioned that explosion on August 17th. We could step up the pressure. I mean, look, people, Iranian submarines periodically go down. Someday one of them might not come up. Who would know why? We can do a variety of things if we wish to increase the pressure.
There was a dozen ideas proffered. How to trigger a war. The one that interested me the most was, why don't we in our shipyard, build 4 or 5 irate boats that look like Iranian PT boats, put Navy SEALs on them with a lot of arms, and the next time one of our boats goes through the Straits of Hormuz, start a shoot-up.
But I'm just suggesting that this is not a either-or proposition. It's just sanctions has to succeed or other things. We are in the game of using covert means against the Iranians. We could get
a false flag attack, like an American ship sunk in the Strait of Hormuz, would also keep Iranian allies like Russia and China at bay, much like the 9/11 attacks kept them from using their power to stop the United States from invading Iraq. The world is a much different place than it was in 2000, and China and Russia have learned a lot, as they have been vocal opponents of many of the pressures the Anglo-American empire has applied to Iran. If China does rise in opposition, that would be something the Anglo-Americans could easily turn the American public onto them too. Our horrible economic conditions are directly responsible to those that own and control our paradigm, the criminal elite in Washington and Wall Street. That being said, the criminal elite will blame all of the problems on anything else in the world except for them. China could have purposely been made into a threat only to take them down in the future. Let me first state that I am no fan of China. Their elite have human rights violations against their own citizens that would make you sick to your stomach. But let's be honest, China would not be a threat if our criminal elite did not build them up in the first place. Our military-industrial complex needs an enemy to justify their war machine. The war on terror was a good ride, but after almost a decade, it's getting a little old. Our banking system needed another country to buy our paper Ponzi scheme, and China became the most obvious target after Japan gorged itself on our debt. Our elites made deals with the Chinese elites to move our manufacturing overseas to use their slave labor and pollute their environment. The Chinese communists got all the technology, manufacturing, and dollars to build up China as a threat. Our elite did this to make tremendous profits and keep the dollar paradigm going. But in the end, I believe that our criminal elite may use China to be the next enemy in a paradigm-shifting war. Since China has now said no more American debt, the Federal Reserve has stepped up as the buyer of last resort. This has bought us some time, but there's a huge economic difference of recycling dollars already in circulation, like the Chinese dollars, than freshly printed ones like that from the Federal Reserve. The Anglo-American elite must solve Triffin's dilemma, where a world currency reaches its apex and must be allowed to default, but somehow not drag down the rest of the world with it. The elite have been trying to get regional and ultimately global currencies in place to solve this dilemma. Now, no nation is going to give up their power to create money, especially now that we're looking at the euro imploding. The only option, I feel, is to do it the old-fashioned way, through war. The only thing the United States is really good at now is exporting debt and bombs. There's way too much at stake for our elite to just silently walk away into the night without a fight. They are trying to keep things going by now fighting 4, 5, 6 wars in the oil-rich Middle East and North Africa region. But the writing is on the wall. The debt ceiling will continue to be raised, and money and debt will be created, and the war machine will continue to churn. This will not end because the elite will say, we can't do this anymore. If anything, history has shown that when the chips are down on the table, they will double down and go off to war. The destruction of the dollar will either be the cause of war, or war will be the destruction of the dollar. If there is an economic false flag, like a massive treasury sell-off, then it could be a cause of war with China. Or if there is a military false flag, it will cause the dollar's destruction and forced introduction of a new monetary paradigm, possibly a global currency. The elite will use this upheaval to destroy any competitors. In the smoking aftermath of the war, they will impose a new paradigm based off of the same destructive seeds of the old paradigm. There is a third threat to the elite's power paradigm that can and should stop all of this. Freedom of information. There is no doubt the internet has gotten away from the criminal elite and that their lies have been exposed. Small sites all over the internet have shown over and over again that the emperor has no clothes. I can see an informational false flag to coincide with the economic and military false flag. They can falsely blame China or domestic groups like Anonymous for massive internet shutdowns. I believe that big corporations will still have a functioning internet, but small informational sites will be shut down for sake of quote-unquote national security. Perhaps it could even be something much worse, where they shut down all free speech and opposition for the sake of national security. I believe ultimately a wide-awake humanity will put an end to all these forms of treachery. We have the benefit of seeing the same playbook over and over again throughout history. And if they do try another false flag, it is imperative that we question the perceived reality and wake humanity up before we get marched off to another war. Our job is not necessarily to fight this evil. We only need to expose evil so it will cease to have power. The real challenge is to show people that the good that they think they are doing is really evil, and they will no longer do it. We need to convince our fellow citizens that debt and war are evil, and we need to rid this scourge from humanity once and for all. The timing and order of all this is unknown, but just know that it's going to get dramatically worse before it gets any better. Every 80 years or so, a paradigm dies and a new one is born out of the ashes of the old. 80 years ago, we had the Great Depression and World War II, and this was the creation of our current paradigm. 80 years before that, we had the Civil War, and 80 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. So far, the United States has survived and has gone on to become a global superpower. This time around, we have the possibility of a Revolutionary War, a Civil War, or a World War, or a combination of all three. There's nothing in writing that says America will go on forever. In fact, given our horrible record on debt and war, this system deserves to die an awful death, so that humanity will never go back down this path again. Only then can we go about creating a new paradigm, one that resonates with who we are, built upon peace and understanding.
Okay, he's a bit optimistic. I take a little different approach and believe that it will end up in the hands of the globalists. Also, I wanted to mention in the last few minutes here about this group Anonymous that you see on the web spreading all this information or trying to shut down sites, etc. I think it's a controlled opposition group, CIA, Black Ops funded. Well, what is it really? It's the most famous hacktivist group in the world, and the informal nature of the group makes its mechanics difficult to really define. Subsequently, without a formal organizational hierarchy, it's difficult to explain Anonymous to the general public and the media. To explain it, you have to have some clarity, and you have to figure out what's really misunderstood about them. Now, I think they're a controlled opposition group set up with Black Ops money. Now, the word hacktivist means hacker and activist. When people have technical skills, have access to the internet, and understand how network infrastructure and servers work, can be tempting to put that knowledge into having some effect on the world. The activist part of the hacktivists means that they don't do their hacking and cracking without a cause. Various people behind Anonymous worldwide are united in a belief. Okay, now this is it. Remember he said that this could be a reason to shut down the internet, and that would be what they would want, so that basically the real truth sites really have nowhere to go. Now, in a belief that corporations and organizations they consider to be corrupt should be attacked. Now, they could basically, really, they're causing their own problem here. They create this organization, and then they have their solution, right? Shut down the internet. We can't allow national security to be compromised, can we? So in the name of national security, they eventually shut down the internet, along with the other false flags that the interview I presented to you just earlier, I had to mention. Now, the various people behind Anonymous supposedly are worldwide are united in a belief that corporations and organizations, like I said, that are corrupt should be attacked. If you're an administrator for a network that has little reason to be targeted for these social activists, your network and servers are unlikely to become a target. But if for some reason you believe your network might become a target, you should recommend testing it for handling DDoS attacks. That's a little bit above me, but you might want to do that, as that's the most common method Anonymous uses to bring down web servers. Okay, so that's just a bit on that group. And like I said, I believe that they are funded through Black Ops money, and they will be used, could be used in the future as one reason to shut down the internet when it comes to the point that, along with the other false flag attempts, whether it be civil war, a monetary crisis, all of it together, don't forget the power grid, could be devastating. But the whole goal of the Vatican-led New World Order is to bring America to its knees and to create a global one-world religion, one-world government. And we've preached about that for years on this show, and it seems to be reaching that point where, again, we're moving from the, you don't hear as much about ISIS, do you? But now it's China, it's Russia, it's Iran, it's North Korea. So let's see what occurs in the days to come. Back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.